Hey kids, it's Pastor Brian back with our reading of Little Pilgrims Progress. Hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have. I love reading. When I was a kid, I had favorite books that I loved to read. One of my favorite books was The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. Not sure if you've read that. Also, as I got a little older, I began to love like The Hobbit is one of my favorite books, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I love that fantasy literature, and that's maybe what draws me to Pilgrim's Progress because it is similar in that way. So what do you like to read? What's your favorite book? I hope you've enjoyed this time as we read Little Pilgrim's Progress. Let's continue on in our journey and see where little Christian is at and what's going to happen to him in today's chapters. We're starting in chapter 19. Chapter 19, An Enemy. Watchful was standing at the door of the lodge when little Christian came out of the palace. When he opened the gates, he told Christian that another boy pilgrim had passed by. I asked him his name, and the porter said he had told me it was Faithful. "Oh," cried little Christian, "I know him very well. His house is quite near to ours." "How long has he been gone? Do you think I can overtake him?" "It is about half an hour since I saw him," replied Watchful. "I should think by this time he'll be at the bottom of the hill." Christian was so pleased at the thought of having a companion that he determined to walk as quickly as possible in order to overtake Faithful. But first, we must say goodbye to our kind friends who had all come down to the gates with him. "It is a beautiful morning," said Discretion. "Suppose we go to the foot of the hill with little Christian." "That would be very nice," said Charity, "and perhaps we may find Faithful there. I wonder why he has not come in to see us." "It is early," said Discretion, "and no doubt he wishes to hasten on his journey. I told you that the beautiful palace was built on top of the hill Difficulty. The valley below is called the Valley of Humiliation, and a path led down into it from the gates of the palace was very steep indeed." Christian was glad when Discretion took his hand and held it tightly in her own, for he could scarcely keep from slipping. "I think it is difficult to get up this hill, and dangerous to go down," he said. "Yes," replied Prudence. "People sometimes have bad falls upon this path." It was not long before they found themselves in the valley, and then Discretion gave Christian a little package of food, which she had brought with her. "We had been very glad to see him," she said, "and I shall not forget to give your message to your father when he comes to this place, to the palace." Little Christian was quite sorry to say goodbye, and when Discretion and her daughters had left him, he felt very lonely indeed. The valley was quiet and cool, and he walked on quickly, hoping to see Faithful in the distance before him. But instead of Faithful, he presently saw a very evil-looking man coming along the path to meet him. The man was tall and strong, and his face was not a pleasant one. As he drew near, Christian remembered his name, for he had seen him before. He was one of the chief officers in the army of the wicked prince, and he was called Self. "He is one of the king's enemies," thought Christian, "and he will try to hurt me. What shall I do?" At first, he thought he would turn around and run to the foot of the hill. Discretion might look back and see him, or perhaps Watchful might be at the palace gate and would would send someone to help him. But then he remembered that he had no armor for his back, and that his breastplate and shield would be of no use to him unless he faced his enemy. So he determined to trust in the king and go straight on. Perhaps as he was such a little boy, Self would pass by without taking notice of him. He walked on steadily, and in a few minutes, Self was quite close to him. "I should like to know where you have come from," he said, stopping in front of Christian, looking down at his bright armor. Christian, very much frightened, but he answered, "From the city of destruction." "And where are you going? To the city of the king?" "Perhaps you have forgotten," said Self, "that the city of destruction belongs to me. If you were not a little boy who can be taken back again, I should kill you for running away without my leave." "I know the city belongs to you," replied Christian bravely, "but the king loves me better than you do, and I would rather live with him." Then Self smiled. "Don't be foolish," he said. "I can be very kind to people when I like them, and if you will come back with me and promise not to run away, I will not be angry with you. You shall live in my house and be one of my own servants. I am one of the king's servants, said Christian. That does not matter. The king's servants often run away from him. Besides, you are my servant when you were at home, and you ought to be very glad that I'm willing to forgive you and take you back. Poor little Christian felt the tears that were coming into his eyes and his lips and began to tremble. But he answered, I love the king, and I would rather be his servant. Please let me go on. But Self had made up his mind that Christian should go home with him. So he said, don't be in a hurry. Just think of all the trouble you may meet with on your way. Our soldiers are up and down everywhere. And if they see you and try to hurt you, I don't suppose the king will take the trouble to help a child. You know you have served him very badly since you set out. You were so careless that you fell in the slough, and when you let worldly deceive you and turn you out of the right path. And then you slept in the arbor and lost your roll, and when you came in the sight of the lions, you were very nearly turned back for fear of them. And yet, at the beautiful palace, you talked as if you were one of the king's most faithful servants. I don't know how you can expect him to do anything for you. Little Christian knew that all these things were true, and he wondered how Self had heard about them. I have been very sorry, he said, and the king will forgive me. He knows I am only a little boy. Then Self could not keep back his anger any longer. He had been speaking gently because he wished Christian to forsake the king of his own accord. But when he saw that the words were of no use to him, he became fierce with passion. I hate your king, he cried, and everybody and everything belongs to him. You are my servant, and you shall never go to the celestial city, for I will kill you. Chapter 20, the first battle. Little Christian had scarce time to put up his shield before Self began to throw fiery darts at him, and he feared that he would soon be killed by them. But the story of David and the giant that he had heard at the Palace Beautiful came to his mind. He thought, David had only his shepherd's dress, and I am wearing the good armor that the king has given me. I will trust in him and try not to be afraid. So he held his shield firmly in his arm and caught nearly all of Self's darts upon it until the wicked soldier became wild with rage and rushed upon at little Christian and seized him with his strong arms. Those darts that Christian had not been able to catch upon his shield had struck him and wounded him in his hands and his feet. The wounds were very sore and were bleeding so much he began to feel faint. Self had seen this, and he flung the child upon the ground, thinking he would now be able to kill him. Little Christian had drawn out his sword from its sheath, but when Self threw him down, it fell upon his hand, and as he lay in the path, he thought he had now no chance of escaping from his cruel enemy. But just as Self was going to strike his last blow, Christian saw that the sword lay within his reach. He put out his hand and caught it up, and before Self had time to prevent him, he thrust it into the soldier's body and gave him a terrible wound. Now the soldiers of the wicked prince could not bear the pain of the wound given with one of the king's sword, and Self cried out when Christian struck him. Then the boy's courage came back to him, and he thrust the weapon at his enemy a second time. And after that, Self fled away across the valley, and Christian was left alone. He lay for a minute upon the path, and then he got up and looked around. All over the grass lay the sharp darts that had been thrown at him, but Self was gone. Christian could not see him anywhere. It was the king who helped me, he thought, and his heart was full of thankfulness for his wonderful deliverance. But the poor little soldier had been sadly wounded, and he felt so faint and ill he was obliged to sit down upon the grass and lean his head upon a great rock. He was weak and tired, and I think he must have fallen asleep, for he had a strange dream. He thought that his mother came across the valley, his own darling mother, whom he had lost so long ago. Her face shone as little Christian had seen the moonbeams shining on a dark night. A soft silvery light seemed all around her. She was more beautiful than discretion, and her eyes, as she looked at him, were full of love and pity. Little Christian stretched out his hand to her, and he came toward him and knelt down in the grass and took him in her arms. Then she tenderly dressed the wounds and lay quite still and wondered if she was an angel. She did not speak to him, but presently she laid him down again upon the grass, and he felt her lips touch his forehead. "Mother, mother," he cried. He opened his eyes, but she was not there. He was lying on the rock, and he could see all the way down the long valley. He was quite alone. He sat up and looked at his wounds. They were not bleeding now, and they did not even ache. "I must have been dreaming," he thought, "and yet the wounds are all healed. Perhaps it was my mother. They said she would often be near me. Oh, I think the king must have sent her to help me. And when he saw I was sick and faint, or at least he must have sent one of his shining ones." Then he remembered that discretion had given him some food. So he sat still for a little while and ate the bread and meat she had given him. "I must make haste," he thought, "for I have lost so much time. I wonder whether self has really gone quite away, or whether he will come back to look for me again." And he said the soldiers were all around. I must be ready to meet them. So he kept his sword in his hand and looked carefully from side to side among the rocks and the bushes as he went along. Chapter 21, The Dark Valley. It was late in the afternoon when Christian came to the end of the Valley of Humiliation. He had seen nothing more of his enemy self, of his enemy's self. And he was beginning to think that he might now put his sword back in his sheath when he saw two boys running toward him. Their faces were white, as those of mistrust and timorous had been. And as they came up to him, Christian said to him, "Where are you going?" "Back, back," cried the boys. "If you care for your life, you had better come with us." "Why?" asked Christian. "What is the matter?" "Matter," they answered. "We were going to the celestial city as you are, but we have been as far as we dare indeed. If we had ventured a few steps further, we should never have the chance to come back and save you." "What did you find?" said Christian, wondering what dangers he might have to pass through that night. He had no thoughts of turning back, for his victory over self had made him love and trust his good king more than ever. But he wished to know what the boys had seen, so he might be prepared to defend himself. "Just before us," he said, "in the dark valley is the dark valley, but we saw it in time and we hurried away." "What is it like?" "It is terrible. It is the most dreadful place we have ever seen, full of darkness, and we could hear cries and groans of people in pain. No doubt they are pilgrims who have been lost there." "The way of the king leads straight through it," said Christian. "Then I do not see how we are to escape it," said one boy. "You can try if you like," said the other boy, "but if we get to that city at all, it must be by some other road than that." So they left him, and little Christian went on, keeping his sword in his hand. The dark valley lay much lower than the Valley of Humiliation. It was narrow, and the black rock seemed almost to meet over Christian's head as he entered it. The evening had come on. The path had soon surrounded with a thick mist, so that he could scarcely see his hand when he stretched it out before him. Flashes of light kept breaking through the mist, but he did not know whether they were flames or fire or lightning. And the air was filled with terrible sounds, which made his heart beat fast with fear. By the light of the flames, he saw that the path upon which he was walking was a very dangerous one. On his right hand was a very deep hollow, and on his left a marsh. And it was all he could do to prevent himself from slipping into either one or the other. I think that this walk through the dark valley was the worst part of little Christian's pilgrimage. Although he tried to think of the king and his goodness, he could not help being frightened. And in one part of the valley, where some of the wicked prince's servants were waiting to trouble the pilgrims, a man came up behind him and whispered bad words in his ears. Little Christian could not see the man. He was so confused that he fancied that he had said the wicked words himself, and he feared the king would be angry with him. About the middle of the night, he was walking slowly along in the darkness, and he heard footsteps in the distance. Some people were coming toward him, shouting and uttering dreadful cries. He knew that it must be a band of the wicked prince's servants, and he thought, "They will hurt me, perhaps kill me altogether." He wondered whether he should turn back, for he was becoming so frightened that his whole body was trembling. But he had already come a long distance through the valley, and he said to himself, "Perhaps I am not far from the end of it, and going back might be worse than going forward." Presently he found that the wicked soldiers had taken a different path, and he did not meet them at all. And now little Christian was comforted in his loneliness by hearing the voice of a pilgrim who was repeating aloud some of the beautiful words that were written in the king's book. It was too dark for him to see who the pilgrim was, but he hoped it might be faithful and that he would soon be able to overtake him. At last he called out to him, but although Faithful heard Christian speak, he did not know who might be wishing to stop him, so he made no answer. Still, little Christian knew he was there, and he felt less frightened than when he had thought he was alone. So I hope you're continuing to enjoy this story. You know, it's a great reminder that we are going to face trials in our life. We're going to face hardships. Even there's going to be enemies that will come against us, especially from the evil one. We talk about Satan or the devil. But you know what? We don't have to fear because God is with us no matter what. God is helping us. He helps us to overcome trials and temptations in our lives. So just as little Christian faced that battle and faced the dark valley and all the things, God helped him to overcome all those things and gave him the strength and the grace to do all of that. So we don't need to live our lives in fear. We need to live it in faith and trust in God. And no matter what we face, no matter what you face in your life, God will watch out for you. Well, I hope you'll join me next time as we continue on in Little Pilgrims Progress. Have a great day.